How do you build an independent music business? And I don't mean an entire industry. I mean your own DIY project. How do you turn that passion and spark for music into something which grows into your job? It could be, as Mary Spender said in the last episode, converting some of that 100 million views on YouTube into 40,000 record sales and lots of Patreons and ticket sales and all these other things that you can get once you've built an audience, created a mailing list, and developed a parasocial depth of connection. I'd recommend going back and listening to that episode if you've not heard it yet. But for this episode, I'd like to introduce you to someone called Isobel, who runs Girls Twiddling Knobs. This interview took place a couple of years ago, and it didn't quite fit with any of the themes for the podcast seasons. And then I realised it fits with all of the themes, because what Isobel has done is create a mission-driven rather than money-focused business. She has turned her love of recording, engineering, mixing, and creating spaces for women to thrive into an academy and a training organisation and a series of projects and podcasts and all sorts of things. Like, Isobel's one of the most inspiring people I follow online, and I'm quite happy to say that. I find her so fascinating in the way in which she can turn something as simple as a little course they're running for field recording into these little moments of intrigue and excitement and curiosity, and it makes me wish I could go on the course because it seems great. And this conversation really neatly follows on really from my conversation with Mary Spender and talking about purpose, and to talk about how when you've got such a large audience, converting it into something else, but actually DIY, small independent businesses, people that have come from the art world, don't need giant reach. They need great ideas. This is my conversation with Isobel, and unlike the rest of this season where we are looking at the future of music, this one is very much about looking for its moral compass. There's lots of conversations about production and sound and all sorts of geekery like that. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did having it. I guess the best place to start is by introducing yourself in the multitude of things that you've done and do.
So my name's Isobel. I started as a singer-songwriter. I mean, musician. I think that's a difficult divide that there is. But yeah, I write songs, and I started in music by writing songs, singing songs, but also playing the clarinet and being in the wind ensemble and all that stuff. I then went on to cut a long story short, ended up living in London, doing lots of gigs, not getting anywhere, but being really interested in more kind of experimental areas of music, always have been, which then led me into doing an MA in Sonic Arts at Belfast's Sonic Arts Research Centre. Actually, and that's a very random kind of change, I guess, but I got a scholarship to go there. So that's what kind of brought me there. And then I really fell in love with sound on an even deeper level.
And is Sonic Arts, is that is like, you study like Delia Derbyshire and like...
Yeah, and we didn't study Delia Derbyshire, but which, we can talk about that, of course. But I mean, really, it's the aesthetics of sound. So, and that takes you all the way through from the actual physics of how do you synthesize sound, all the way through to how do you create an immersive sound installation, to how do you create immersive game environments, how do you capture field recordings, lots of different things. How do you compose with sound as almost a sculptural material? So it's just the aesthetics of sound basically, and all of its different applications.
Note to the listeners, I did have to check that my sound was okay before we begun for these very reasons.
But the thing is that I mean, and we could talk about this a little bit as well, but I'm neurodiverse. I can be very slapdash about my approach to these things, and I have to really kind of sit myself down, and I've had to learn to really sit myself down and become more of a perfectionist about these things. And so I feel like I hope I've got a healthy balance of, on the one hand, really appreciating sound, but not being massively anal about it.
Well, that's interesting because we met through Catherine, the anchoress, who you've been doing some teaching courses for women in studios with. Is it called The Culture of Belonging? Is that the name?
Yeah.
And I think she's the opposite. She's
it's so funny.
She's like the mirror of you, because I think perfectionism in her production comes first a lot of the time.
Well, it's so funny because Catherine is autistic and I'm dyslexic. I very highly I'm very suspicious that I may also be ADHD. And we have the opposite neurodiverse kind of behaviours or preferences as well. So where Catherine would be quite kind of anxious about future scenarios that may crop up, whereas I'm like, well, I'll cross it when we come to it, But also Catherine, they were really complementary in lots of ways as well, because Catherine, like you say, would be incredibly fastidious about certain details to do with production, whereas I'm really good at being able to describe the big picture and also being able to describe quite complex processes to other people. So we were a good match, but it was very funny the way that our neurodiversity intersected. It was just so different. So yeah, I hope that I've got a kind of healthy balance there, because I know that people can be incredibly kind of anal and geeky about these things, and I think that it's important to have a healthy balance, and I think that's what's led me to what I do now. So to cut a long story short, I ended up getting a PhD in sonic arts. I specialised in field recording, electroacoustic composition, voice, and kind of ways of manipulating voice, and then went on to found the Female DIY Musician, and that has become a resource and a platform and a business which helps women learn to record and produce their music, but not in the kind of standard way that's been done before. It's really profiling things like artistry, community, and respect at the centre of all of that, including my podcast, the Girls Twiddling Knobs podcast. But
which
also
is a great name for a podcast.
Thank you. But also that it profiles, all the work that I do profiles this sense of experimentation and play, and integrates things like soundscape composition and field recording, and some of those pioneers like Delia Derbyshire and Daphne Oram, so that it's not just about becoming a bedroom producer that's going to make sick beats and sell them online, because there's loads of places that you can learn to do that, and it's not anything against that. But it's just to say, well, actually, in this online space, there's a lot of room for more considered, nuanced approaches that you may only find in certain degrees even, or, that kind of more slightly more academic, but in no way elitist, and trying to bring that to people who maybe haven't had the opportunity to explore that yet. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Which is interesting, because I think the reasons why I started to love record production was those details. It's the ad libs on a Beastie Boys record, or it's which I guess in terms of a cityscape is like field recording in a city, isn't it? Sometimes, and things like Loads of Floods records, like his production on some of the sounds on the Nine Inch Nails records. There's just like all these textures, and it's not a surprise that Trent Reznor went into film composition, because I think that the immersiveness of the detail and the subtle things and the like static of the room and all those different things, like the idea they were playing like horror movie VHSs, but some of that's being picked up on the mic, this like really low frequency and things, and because I think the detail of sound, and it's interesting because when I came up with Drowned in Sound, I was only 16.
Wow.
And I came up with the name, and I didn't think about how important sound was to me, so it's kind of good that I came up with something that stands the test of time.
It really has stood the test of time, because it's a great name, and it just evokes so much. I think so many people can relate to that idea of being drowned in sound. And it
was emo, and I was very emo. I had to have death in the spectre of what I came up with. Which brings us on to what we're discuss today, because we had about 20 different options of things we could discuss. I think the really central one is you talked about it being a mission-driven business. And I always think purpose is the most important thing to any project. So many other people put profit first, and my brain doesn't work like that. whereabouts, what's the origin story? I quite like that, the like superhero origin story. What was your spider and the nuclear waste?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that it's an amalgamation of these different experiences over the years. I think growing up, I was very aware that as a woman in music, I mean, growing up in the 90s and the noughties especially, I was very aware that to be a woman in music meant that you really only had a very narrow kind of identity that you could fit into, and otherwise you were just not going to have a career. And even the musicians that I could see who were successful, who were, you know, apparently quite alternative, like Bjork or PJ Harvey, they were still operating very much in that narrow framework, as in they were very thin, very photogenic. They had, you know, a big team of men around them, and it just felt like it was really hard to have a career as a woman if you were not going to be that. And that's not to belittle what those women have contributed to the music industry at all, and that they've done incredible things. But it's just, if you grow up and you're, you know, a broad-shouldered, slightly dumpy ginger person, for example, you might look at that.
I thought you were describing me for a second, but I'm not ginger. It's blonde, but it might be the camera.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of the listeners are nodding their heads. But that's most people, you know. And I remember at 16 kind of putting on a bit of weight and thinking, oh, crap, like this is really going to mean I can't do this career, which is just bonkers when you think about other career avenues. And but that was just really obvious to me. And that when I was even in bands, it was just the classic stuff, you know, just even as a musician, I would not be taken as seriously, or people would want to wrap me in cotton wool because there'd just be this idea that because I was the only woman in the band, something awful was going to happen, and therefore they had to be the knight in shining armour. It never felt like I could just have a kind of normal relationship. And that's not to say that those people were in the wrong. It's like, it's true that music is very flawed in that sense, and there are genuine risks, or there are genuine differences if you're a woman or non-binary. But that was just a very kind of formative experience that I just soaked up everywhere I went, every artist I saw on TV, every experience I had at a gig. It just all kind of accumulated. And then when I went to uni and I loved the music undergrad I did, I went to Dartington College of Arts, and it was fantastic. And I did an elective in sonic arts. I was really lucky that they did that at undergrad level. But again, I kind of started to notice, in this studio environment, in this more music tech environment, suddenly I'm hugely in the minority here, and I'm hugely in the minority that I would have an interest in this, and then I would even have the guts to pursue that, you know. And then doing the MA and doing the PhD, again, I was just always one woman in the room, maybe two women in the room. There were certain things that I was interested in that just weren't valued very much in those spaces sometimes. And I think that's changing, and it's changed quite a lot. But anything that I did where I showed some kind of interest in the visual aesthetic or the human interaction with what I was doing was belittled or seen as extra or an add-on. Whereas to me, I thought, well, no, this is going to hugely change how someone interacts with the sound or interacts with this as a piece of technology or whatever it might be. Like, this is as important. And so it was all those kind of tropes that just kept building up, not to mention conversations that I had with, say, I remember being called in for a meeting with an A&R guy. I thought we were meeting, this is such a classic, you know, I thought we were meeting to talk about maybe him booking me for some gigs. That's what I'd initially emailed him about. But because he heard my music, he decided he wanted to sign me to a record deal, called me in, didn't even say, by the way, I've decided I'd quite like to talk about this thing. He just started talking about it as if I'd immediately be just grateful that he'd consider me. I was very confused, and I was like, oh, okay, this is a kind of curveball. And then he started doing the whole kind of take you down to make you think you need me type thing, where he was like, right, well, you know, obviously we can't market you for your looks, and kind of looked me up and down, because, you know, we'll have to just market you on the quality of your music. It's
like a form of professional negging, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's just you start seeing it again and again, and you realise that it's replicated in coercive, controlling relationships and all that stuff. And then he said, "You see, the way I see you, Isobel, is you're like a piece of meat that just hasn't been cooked yet." and I can cook you. And you just think, wow, I cannot believe we're having this conversation. And I just instantly didn't respect him at all. But I can see how if you were a younger woman and you were maybe a slightly different personality.
And you dream of being a piece of meat.
Yeah. You might interpret it differently. But for me in that scenario, I almost laughed. I was like, wow. And I said, well, look, I'm going back to finish my PhD. And then he was like, well, why would you do that? We're going to put you in the room with some amazing producers. And, you know, just this incredible attitude that because I had a vagina, but I didn't have the right physique
or
face.
Yeah. How does that
Yeah.
change how you play an instrument or use a mixing desk or?
Yeah, just, you know, all of these assumptions and all this way of talking to me, just that, you know, was it was really shocking to me, you know. And whenever I've got close to that part of the industry, I've always run a mile, and it's meant that I have definitely missed out on a lot of opportunities that other people have gone with. But then I've seen a lot of women get burned. And it's just this really difficult, you don't really have a good option, you know. You either say no to people like that and miss out on opportunities, or you say yes to people like that and then get burned in the process and really have some quite traumatic experiences potentially. So that's that as well. But I also kind of just saw this massive gap in the things that I loved about music technology being so hard to access unless you had incredible resilience and staying power, especially as a woman, and the amount of internal gymnastics you had to go through in your mind about feeling worthy enough, feeling good enough, being able to be in the room as the only woman all the time, you know, to actually access all that incredible, amazing information and skill and creativity that's there in sound and music production. It was just so gatekeeped and so much of a barrier there. So I just saw this massive gap of there's so many women who are really interested in those slightly more, you know, experimental aspects of music production. They're a great gateway into women producing more, but they're so difficult to access, both because you mainly only come across them in really good quality academic environments, or even if you get in the room, so many women drop out or don't engage to the level that they could do because there just is a lack of inclusion there.
Not to sound like I've been in a marketing meeting, but was it a bit like taking back control? Because if you consider that for a long time, studios required obviously a lot of resource, like often that was resource controlled by men or budgets controlled by men. I mean, I tried to make a playlist once upon a time of records produced by women, and trying to find many things pre-1990 was quite hard.
Yeah.
Apart from the kind of Delia Derbyshire's and Daphne Orams and like discovering that Joan Jett produced Bikini Kill's Rebel Girl, like, which I didn't realise.
No, I didn't know that.
And like obviously looking through some of the producers that Prince worked with, I guess they were slightly more engineers than producers, because I doubt he would give them full credit. But
yeah.
And I think you start to realise that like there aren't many examples. But I was just thinking in terms of that moment when home computing, and I spoke to St Vincent once, and she talked to me about when she was like 14, driving to some like big like Walmart or something to buy her first piece of computer software so she could start recording, and like how empowering that was to begin to learn and not have to do things on other people's terms. I think it's such a key part of how the industry's changed. But we are at a point where there's 100,000 tracks coming out every week, and I'd assume the majority of those are still people going into either a studio environment with a friend that's got a computer and some mics, which again is potentially not a safe space, because it's like the modern equivalent of going around some weird photographer's house to get your pictures taken, or it's people learning for themselves. And I can see as a business opportunity as well as a empowering resource, like I can see how the Venn diagram makes sense, and not in the kind of Succession, Substack meets Masterclass as a business model. Like I can see that it was really obvious in hindsight to start building the business that you've been building. So do you want to tell me a bit about how you got started with it?
Yeah, and I feel like actually, just to give some more context as well, that the other reason I started it was actually came from a question of how can I help more women release music? So my first step was actually just setting up a free Facebook group, which I called the Female DIY Musician Tribe at the time. And it was just me really testing out, what is this thing that I want to do? And at the start, I thought I just wanted to be an online resource that would just be giving women lots of different tools about being a DIY musician. So everything from releasing through to songwriting. And then that became clear that that was just too wide. And I think I remember putting out like a coaching kind of offer, and it didn't convert into sales, and it was hugely undervalued. And there's loads we can talk about with like starting a business and your self-worth and the relationship there, but it was hugely undervalued and it just wasn't sustainable. And then I kind of started having to really think, right, how do I get really specific and intentional about what this business is and who it serves? And so I did loads and loads of calls with people in my community. I would speak to people on the phone and say, look, if I was to do this kind of course, what would you think about that? Or what's the biggest reason you haven't released your music? Because for me, that was the core aim, was to get more women releasing music and to improve those metrics so that women were having a bigger presence. Because so much of the time, you'd always hear this sense of, well, we'd love to book women for festivals, but there aren't as many artists. Or we'd love to include a woman on our, like you were saying, Sean, like best produced music of the last whatever years, but women aren't producing music. And then there'd always be that thing of, but women don't want to, obviously, because they could if they wanted to. It's a free country. And then I would always be like, yeah, but it's not as simple as that. Why on earth would 50% of the country not be doing this stuff just because they didn't want to? It doesn't make any sense, because also of knowing the women I know and the conversations that you have behind the scenes. So I just felt like I really want to help women actually record and release their music. But when I had those conversations with people from my community, it was the recording aspect that was holding them back. And they would say, I'd love to do a course with you about releasing, Isobel, because obviously I've got those Spotify streams that makes me a very compelling leader, of how do you release your work as a DIY woman in music. But when I spoke to people, the thing that was really holding them back was that they didn't have any recordings, and that they'd maybe been trying to record their music for free with a friend for years, or they'd gone into a studio and spent thousands of pounds, felt really ignored in the whole process, and came out with recordings they didn't even feel like they were their own, and didn't want to release because they felt ashamed of the process, or the outcome. Or
were trying to record something that was very personal, intimate, and the engineer didn't realise the mic was on whilst making a filthy comment about them. Not to directly name any names, but I sat in the room whilst that happened, and I suggested we cancelled the rest of the session. It was awful, and I honestly didn't know that the artist heard it in their headphones in the other room, which then in a way turned into the recording itself has now got that laced in it for the artist, and it's like to think that a studio should be a space where you have to be open and vulnerable, and the psychology of being in a studio is so important to capturing, and obviously at great expense.
Yes. Yeah, you've paid for the privilege to be degraded like that. It's sick. I hope that guy was sacked. I don't know what happened. Anyway, I distracted from the point, but I think it's a key one, because I think I'm privileged to have been witness to those conversations with lots of women in the industry, based on the artists I've worked with and different people who feel comfortable speaking to me. And I think a lot of men in the industry don't necessarily get exposed to how awful the industry is that they work in, and are complicit into keeping as a kind of awful place. So I think what were the barriers that the artists were saying they had, and then what was, I guess, if someone signed up for your course, what would be some of the first things they'd start to learn? So one of the biggest things that holds lots of women back is self-doubt, and a fear of messing up, a fear of adhering to a stereotype of not being very good with technology because they're a woman. Also, just massive overwhelm at everything they have to learn, which has been reinforced by mansplaining and patronising when they've tried to do a little bit and then someone said, but you didn't do this properly and you could have done that and you didn't do this. And, you're using that microphone. Well, that's not good enough at all. And you have to have multiple microphones that's, positioned in multiple directions. And it's just
of that
just
meanwhile,
reinforces.
Here's a Daniel Johnson record recorded on a dictaphone that's...
Yes. I mean... It's bollocks. It's all bollocks, and it just depends on what's your intended outcome. How do you like working, and what kind of emotion and atmosphere are you trying to embed in your recording? Because you could record something on a phone and it could be beautiful, but then I guess this is where my background in slightly more experimental production comes in. That I'm not rigid in that way of thinking, But it made me see that there needed to be a music production course that was totally redesigned. And so with Home Recording Academy, which is my kind of signature course, I have a couple of other courses that are sort of smaller courses. But in HRA, the very first module is all about mindset. So before we get into anything to do with technology, everyone goes through a module which is identifying maybe stories or beliefs that they have both about themselves and about music technology in general. And really unpicking where have those stories started and those beliefs started. And then we move into how you're going to sit with that, but go through Home Recording Academy and not let them derail you. And we write a course promise, and it's much more touchy-feely. It's stuff you'd never get in a music production course at all. But a lot of men will be listening to this conversation right now, Sean, I'm sure, and thinking that sounds fucking awesome. It's not just women who respond to that and want that and need that, but the vast majority of women, that's one of the big things that's holding them back, because they'll immediately get their hands on that technology and immediately all of that self-doubt will creep in, and that sense of, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm an imposter, I should have left it to an expert, what an idiot I am, this is never going to work. So with HRA, we just face that head on right from the start. Home Recording Academy. Sorry, yeah. So with Home Recording Academy, we face that. That's the first thing we do. The next module is all to do with listening. So again, it's like really getting into how do we listen to music? How do we listen beyond melody and lyrics and chord structures even? And how do we start to see recordings as whole worlds of sound? And so again, it's like really getting into the kind of the intricacies and getting away from the formulaic approach to bedroom production.
So it's also that finding what you love. Like, for instance, I didn't think I liked art galleries because I don't like the vast majority of art in them. It's like, but all you're seeing is the Coldplay of history. You're not seeing, like, the first time I saw Francis Bacon, I was like, okay. And then I saw some Jenny Savile and I was like, well, this has got the same visceral feeling as some of the music I love. It makes sense that I'd love this. And I think learning, sorry, I'm not meaning to mansplain what you just said, but that sense of learning what you love about production, I think it's really interesting. The artists I've worked with know exactly what they want to sound like, and often that's the production from a track. It's not they don't want a song that sounds like it. Yeah, it's been one thing that's been quite interesting recently is this artist called Timbra. And like 4 artists I know, all women, all absolutely love his records because, and it's the sound and the textures of them that he's just like, they don't sound that dissimilar to the Arctic Monkeys in places or the Walkman or some records like that. It's just been really interesting that one artist has recurringly come up, and he's tiny really in terms of the grand scheme of things, but his records have just got this great vibe. And I think the Kills come up a lot because of that, because Jamie's production's got that static and texture and grit to it, whilst also sounding like full-on party tunes some of the time, and it's just drum machine and a guitar most on a lot of it. Anyway, that's a distraction, but I think it's that the art of learning how to listen and to figure out what you like. I'd assume that would be the bit where I'd be like, can I sign up now? Because I just want to like better learn all that stuff.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, is that's the other issue that a lot of women come across, is that no one's ever asked them to have an opinion on what they want their recording to sound like, because it's just presumed they're not interested or they can't cope with it. or they don't know enough. And so that second module in HRA is really important, because it's like, right, we're going to learn how to listen to production like a producer. And I then intentionally ask them, what do you like? I have a playlist that we listen to, all different types of female artist tracks and different genres. And I'm like, I want you to write down, what do you like? What do you not like? Don't worry. Like, you're not going to offend anyone. They're not going to hear you. Just own it. What do you still have questions over? And then they identify their sonic signature that they're working towards with their own recording. And it's exactly that. It's so important to, it doesn't have to be fixed forever, but to have that confidence of conviction. And that's another thing that really holds so many women back. And also that a lot of women do have those ideas and those opinions, like you're saying, Sean, but they don't realise that that's them starting that journey of production, because that is at the bottom line. That's what a producer does. You don't have to touch any equipment to be a producer. You have to have a vision that you carry forward, and then you deliver that vision in the recording.
And I think that's one of the, like, we could have done a whole episode on what production is, and I would more than happily come back and do that at some other point. But that sense of, like, the engineer is the person that makes sure the mic sounds right, or sounds like not right, because often it's not about it sounding right, it's about sounding like what the artist envisions. And obviously some of that can be done in post. And, like, if you're recording in your own room, then obviously you're limited to what you can do. But if you are going to go into a studio and essentially commission the engineers and potentially a producer or a co-producer to work with you on the record, knowing what you want, being able to kind of A/B it against the records you think sound great seems really key to me from the artists I've worked with. Like, I know with the Anchoress, like, on one of the first things Catherine recorded, she was like, this Blonde Redhead track, this M83 track, the feeling of this Interpol record. The music she was making didn't sound like it, but she knew where she wanted the bass to be. She knew where she wanted the scope of the track to be, which meant that when the mixes were coming back, she was like, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. And I think sometimes you can't hear and envisage it in your head until you've heard it. But I often think how different the history of music would be if it wasn't artists being told what they were meant to sound like. And I know a couple of quite big artists have told me they were forced to put on not just clothing that they didn't feel fit, but sounds and productions, and they had a whole idea of what they wanted to be as an artist, and a label decided what they should be as an artist. And that was like the history of music. If there's not been as many successes, it's been because men have tried to turn women into what they think they should be and not allowed them to be the artists they believe they should be. And I guess in terms of a purpose-driven business, it's that purpose-driven production, like understanding that it serves the song, that it serves the lyrics, that it serves the sonic. I love that term, sonic signature, and the kind of sonic world of the music. So that's the first two bits.
So I won't go through the whole course, but, like, hopefully it gives people an idea of the fact that it's really subverting the traditional music tech learning model. It's also embedding community as part of that. So people have 10 weeks access to a community of just other women going through the course. They have live contact with me, so they can ask me questions, and every question is acceptable. There's never any patronising, never any judgment. So all of that is, like, hugely different to a lot of traditional music tech spaces. And I'm happy to leave it there, Sean, because I know there's other things that we could talk about the behind the scenes, what it's like for me as someone running that business, and the challenges I've had and the great things as well.
I'm not too sure how we'll tackle this, but I guess it would be useful for you to talk through some of the things that you've learned. I've instantly wrote down when you said earlier about self-worth, because I find it really hard to put a price on things. Like, I do consultancy stuff, and I kind of know what my day rate would be for some things, and I often feel like, am I pushing it? So maybe that's a good place to. Maybe the price is not the best place to start, but maybe we should start there with what you meant by that.
Well, yeah. Do you know what? So, like, I'll be really candid and open in this conversation, and that's just my kind of modus operandi, for better or worse. But so right now, like, what so the first, let me go back. So the Female DIY Musician has been operating since 2018. It's been properly my full-time gig since 2020, and I now have a team of people around me. And so we take, on a year-by-year basis, we will take 6 figures, 5 to 6 figures on a year-by-year basis. Now, that does not mean that that's in my bank account. That just means that it's been a startup that's been successful. And now I'm in a phase where I'm trying to make it sustainable and scalable and not absolutely burn me out. Again, that word, burnout.
And I think that's really important to say, because I think so many people see income and revenue and don't understand the costs involved.
Exactly.
And I think that, like, one of the key things I'm trying to do with this podcast in general is people to appreciate and value things.
Yeah.
Because I think in a world where someone thinks they're entitled to music for free, and the worst of which are tech startups that don't understand why they should pay songwriters and things like that. It's like, well, why should I worry about performance royalties? Like, Twitch, currently owned by Amazon, does not pay if your song is played on a Twitch stream, even though Amazon have very deep pockets. Anyway, that's an aside, but I think the value of something is not just the time involved, but there's other costs involved. And it's like, you would love to work for 5 days for free and someone else pay your rent, but that's just, but we're all swimming in the same system, you know. And I want the business that I have to be a great place to work for my team as well, you know. And I think that it's been really important for me as I've built out a team. I have 3 people that work with me as, at the moment, subcontractors. I'm working to be in a position where I can permanently employ people, and I'm nearly there. But I have a fantastic person called Francesca, she manages my communities with me and the social media aspect of what I do. I have another fantastic team member called Rosie, who helps me with the content creation and marketing aspects of what I do. And then I have Jade, who helps me on the Girls Twiddling Knobs podcast, setting up interviews and editing episodes and all that kind of stuff as well. So I have a team that I've built around me now. Whereas I just have sleep deprivation.
Yes, and I still have sleep deprivation. So my really candid sort of point that I want to make is that, you know, that there's been a period of time where it's been hustle, 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 hustle. I haven't done any music that time to speak of, because it's so much work. And I get someone listening to this, you don't have to do what I've done. You know, like I've done a big kind of, it's a big deal. Like, it's been a lot of work. I have different ways that people can work with me. I have communities that have thousands of people in them. Like, you don't have to do what I've done. But just to kind of be really candid, it's been a lot of work. And I've now got to the point where I'm reevaluating how I assess the success of the business. And what happened last week was I was like, I have to start working like I'm a normal fucking person. I have to stop working in the evenings, and I have to stop working at weekends. And that will be really hard for me. But I have to start measuring the success of the business on my well-being and my spare time as much as any kind of income or profitability. And I was thinking how different the industry would be. I'm talking about the online business industry, but I think it equates to music as well. If we all decided that we were going to pay ourselves the same, let's say everyone decided they were going to pay themselves £25,000
this sounds like
a year.
socialism.
I know, yeah. But we measured, and this is, of course, there'd be loads of reasons why this is not viable, but we measured our success on how little we worked. Imagine how different.
I mean, I do have a copy of the 4-hour work week that I've never actually read, because I've never actually found the time to.
You haven't had the time. Yeah. But it really, just thinking about it like that made me start thinking, okay, that is as important, you know. And I really had got to a point where I had headaches all the time. But I think the beauty of having your own business, even if that means self-employed as well, is that you can take a look at that and say, wow, this has to change. And then you can change it.
And I think actually, like, one of the great things about purpose-driven business is you've got something to be driven towards, but it can pull you and make you feel guilty a lot of the time of, and also that thing of, when people understand the purpose, they sort of expect you to do it for free. Like I wasted a lot of time giving advice for free, like to go and speaking at events for free, all because I was like, well, it's really important. I do this thing, and it's like, but even the things that feel like activism need to have, like, at some point this podcast will have ads. and it will hopefully pay for me to do it half a day a week.
And there will be people that bitch and whine about that, and you have to be okay with that.
I'm both of my fingers are in the air all the time.
Yeah, that's great. But that's the self-worth thing, you know, because I think coming back to the self-worth thing, I've kind of realised as I've kind of adulted very much as a business owner, and it's been really, really hard to see people's reactions to certain decisions I've made, or even, you know, that this whole kind of freebie culture that is in music, because I think musicians are so badly treated when it comes to the value of their work, they'll often then undervalue the work that other people do for them. And I think you can probably recognise this, Sean, as a manager as well, that there'll be a lot of artists that will grumble about a manager taking a cut. And you're like, well, they are actually doing something that you're not doing.
I've got some conversations coming up of just like, well, I should really be taking a cut of that. Like,
yeah.
But for instance, there's been things like record labels asking for cuts of Bandcamp Friday releases and things. And like, that's not really on, because that was sort of done as like a fundraiser thing. It wasn't their copyright. But you can start to see with certain things where the industry has, because it's fragmented, it does make some of those things harder. But like, for instance, a while back, I helped set up a company called Fluence. And it came out of a conversation with a friend of mine of basically the time it takes to go through all the music in my inbox and to give, and artists actually really want feedback. They're not that bothered about the coverage. They just want to feel heard, and they want to know, well, you weren't the right person to send it to. Who was? And then we started to put like a small fee on for your time. And it was like less than a price of a pint for me to listen to a 4-minute song and give you feedback, suggest people to send stuff to. And I think that the kickback of this is now pay to play. It's like, well, no, this was paying me for the 10-15 minutes I spent with your music. That is basically going to pay for my charity donation to get into Reading Festival, to work whilst I'm at Reading Festival. It's like 30 or 40 quid.
Yeah, it's the reality behind the scenes. And that's the thing, is that I think as a business owner, I've had to really learn to accept that most people will not realise the reality of behind the scenes of what I do. And it runs all the way through from random people that I meet who hear what I've done. So like, just to give people a sense, like, it's Home Recording Academy has had over 500 women go through it now, and Girls Twiddling Knobs is in over 80 episodes now. There's 10,000 people on our Instagram page. There's 10,000 people on our email list. It's like, it's grown to quite a big thing, a slightly big thing.
If you put them all in one room, it'd be quite daunting to speak to them.
Yes, it would. Yeah. And it takes a lot of time. But so this runs all the way through from people that I meet in the industry, whatever, who are like really surprised I do this full time. But they have no idea of what it means to actually run an online business in the way that I do. All the way through to people who are pissed off that I'm charging 27 quid for 5 whole days of training with me, you know? And I have had to learn to just know that just because somebody doesn't think that's fair, because they are basically operating from a place of ignorance, does not mean I have to listen to them and therefore readjust my boundaries and lower my worth, basically. Because at the end of the day, in that moment, it may feel like a small thing, but over time it accumulates. And then if you want to grow what you're doing so that you are in a position where you don't have to be in it every day, and you can have a team that you really value working with, and you can actually make a difference to many, many more people in music, you have to have those boundaries, and you have to accept that you've made a decision, you thought about it, you considered it, and that decision is the right one for you. And that's the bottom line. And I think that's been what it still is, that one of the hardest things of what I do. And I think being kind of conditioned in music to do so much for free, it's been a massive learning curve to then start a business where you just can't do that anymore. Because otherwise none of it works, none of it works. Because if I'm going to do what I do, I can't have another job. There's no way. I would just have to fold it.
It's also the time and energy you focus on something. Like, one of the things I've been struggling with for the last, because I'm doing management, starting this label, starting this podcast, and doing consultancy for companies. It's like the amount of bandwidth you have in your brain to do the one thing that you're good at really well. For instance, I know that I didn't need to prep that much for this podcast because I've spent the last 20 years of my life doing similar things, so I don't have to prep for it as much. But
Yeah.
Like there's other interviews I've done where I interviewed Tamsin yesterday about her book on mental health. And it's like, I felt bad that I hadn't read the book, but I have experienced all the things the book's about. So I didn't feel as guilty about it. But really, like I listen to podcasts, like I listen to Ezra Klein all the time, and he's read the person's book and read their previous book. And I'm like, that's because that's his job, to go sit in a coffee shop and read them. And it's like and I'm sure the New York Times compensates him very well for doing that, as do the advertisers sponsoring the podcast. Anyway.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that it's having that reality check of, if you want to be in that position, there's lots of things you're going to have boundaries. You're going to have boundaries over, and that other people are not going to respect. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong. As in the boundaries are wrong. They are wrong.
The boundaries
really,
are often always very wrong. And that's possibly one of that's almost a full circle from where we started, of why you started this.
Yeah.
I'm conscious that we've been talking for a while now. And I feel like there's a lot in everything you've said, which hopefully will empower people to go out and create something that sits with their purpose and value and concepts. And wouldn't it be amazing if there was that like minimum wage for a startup person that everyone can have, so they can just get on and do a project? Like that concept of, like, I joked about socialism because obviously in an ideal world that would be like my favorite thing about going to Cuba when I was younger, which I was very lucky that I managed to be able to afford to do that. But I met the former culture secretary of Cuba, who'd put on the Manic Street Preachers and Simply Red and all these other concerts there. And the one thing I took away, apart from the fact he was a really inspiring guy who now makes documentaries somewhere in Florida, and like he wanted me to send him books because he was writing a book about John Lennon and conspiracies around all of that. And I didn't really think about the fact that for him, it was nearly a year's salary for one book from Amazon. But the one thing I took away from it was that musicians and doctors were the only people in Cuba that got paid more because they improved the quality of life. And it was such a powerful thing to think, even within like the socialist kind of system, that you were allowed a second job as a musician. And that was really, because that was important to the culture and society. And I think we've got everything really wrong in terms of where music is and how it's valued, and how there was something you said a minute ago that really reminded me of something, which I think it feels like a good point to end on, which was around the idea of value and what people expect to get for free. Obviously, we've gone through a decade or more of exposure and attention being the thing that people are trying to game for and to give stuff away to get growth. But someone once told me, and it actually it felt so much more vivid having experienced it, but it was, people value things if they've paid for it. And we used to do these free shows at Notting Hill Arts Club on a Saturday afternoon, and it was odd. Sometimes it was rammed, and sometimes hardly anyone was there. And the gigs where hardly anyone was there was because it was a big name, like Guillemot's, one of their early shows was for us. People didn't come because they thought it would be too busy. They wouldn't get in, and they waste their time queuing up outside. was actually when I asked people why they didn't come, they're like, oh yeah, it was Saturday afternoon, I didn't want to not get in. But if they'd been able to buy a ticket, they would have been there. So we started doing guest list shows and just charging £3 for the guest list. So that people felt like they guaranteed entry and they valued it and they didn't not turn up. But I put a show on again this week, and it was free entry because it was in like a members club. It was a little celebration of the label starting. And there was 70 people on the list. We expected 10 not to turn up. I think 15 people didn't turn up. But in any other gig, you would have expected all 70 people to turn up. And I think that idea of valuing something works both ways, because I think as a consumer, there's definitely stuff I've bookmarked that I want to get around to that I wouldn't. But when I had a trial of Masterclass, which I knew was expensive, I watched like a ton of things. Who wouldn't want to sit and watch David Lynch talk about filmmaking and St. Vincent talk about playing guitar, even though I can't play guitar. And it was like that thing of valuing something because it has a price, I think is really important. I guess, is there anything else, just in summary, just like little things that you think people should kind of walk away with, scribble down when they do have that idea they want to do, or the idea they've been sitting on that they've not quite started doing, what are the kind of like a few little notes for them?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is that I know I'm mindful that I said that I haven't made any music for years. I've made a bit, but I haven't made any music for years. I just want to reiterate that does not have to be how this works, and that there were, lots of things that were going on outside of this. Burnout, for one, that meant I really wanted to step away from music. I really wanted to. So that was very complimentary for the way I set up my business. But the beauty of having your own business, even if it's a side hustle, is you can then restructure it. And that's what I'm doing right now, so that I can claw back some days a week to start doing music again. So I just want to make sure that's really clear. I don't want to put anyone off, so you can design this how you want. The second thing I'd say is, coming back to that kind of mission-driven idea, I think it's really important that if you set something up where you want it to be a business, it's not just going to be a passion or a hobby, it's a business. So therefore, where's the gap that you see? And maybe like me, you have a really personal experience of being a particular person in music, for example, and you can see how there just weren't resources that were helping you succeed in the way that they could have been, and that you can see ways to do things differently that would plug that gap. So, for example, you might be a musician listening who has ADHD. And maybe for you, music theory was a nightmare because of that. Maybe there's different ways you can teach music theory because you're also passionate about music theory. And you could find new ways to teach musicians with ADHD how to thrive in music theory.
You also just made me think about Laura Mary from Blood Red Shoes, who started selling guitar straps because she couldn't find any she thought was cool enough.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's always like that you have a wealth of information that maybe you haven't been tuned into in that way. It's just been a frustration. But tune into it and think, have I got something to offer here that would help other musicians? And it always has to come from a place of helping other musicians. It cannot just come from a selfish place of you'd like a bit more money, or you'd like to work from home or whatever. All of that stuff is great, but it does have to come from a place as well as, how can I help other musicians in the industry, or people who want to get into music who aren't in the industry yet? Where's that gap that you can provide something that disrupts what's already there, that does things differently? And that's where a business can be really good as opposed to a charity. You can be disruptive. You can make really on the cuff decisions and restructure things really quickly and respond really quickly and agilely, so that you can do things differently. And so I think that's a big takeaway, I'd say, is just to reflect on, where are those frustrations, where are those niggles? Is there a gap you can fill there and do something differently? And to remember that you may be thinking, well, who am I to do that? But also, why not you? That's the other thing to be thinking about, because that will come up for a lot of people listening to this. They'll think, well, I could do that thing that's in my head, but who am I to do that? I don't have enough experience. As long as you've got the 10% edge on the people that you could teach, then you're the right person to do it. And I had loads of doubts.
And also, like, if you don't know how to do it, you know how to use Google. And I think there's a newer generation where that is so much more part of. I'm often on YouTube tutorials doing the most menial tasks in life. But I think that ability to look stuff up, literally you can ask ChatGPT half the questions half the time now. You won't always get the right answer. But I think that sense of, if you are one of the experts in Gothic country music and you realise there is not a blog out there or a club night for that, and it's a new emerging movement and lots of other people that were into the same sorts of things as you, and all those people in that network, then you are best placed to start that radio show or put a compilation out, or so I think people sometimes forget that their expertise and their position is so key and crucial. So yeah, I hope it one day we're going to get a strange email from someone going, I listened to your podcast 3 years ago and my new business is
Yeah, because I think coming back to the beginning, Sean, of when we're saying this is a reality now. For anyone who wants to make music their full-time gig, this is a reality. You cannot avoid this. Having multiple revenue streams, some of which will be a very kind of standard business model, that's a reality. So I think embracing that now will really help you stand the test of time as a musician over the next couple of decades and beyond. And I think just being ready to fail, being ready to not get things right. Oh yeah, and starting before you feel ready. You are not going to ever be ready to do this. And when I started the Female DIY Musician, I was nowhere near ready. I had no idea. I was an idiot when it came to business. I was so green. And I had all these doubts about whether I was the right person to do this. I've never self-identified as this kind of music tech expert. It just happens to have been a part of my artistry. And my friends would say, well, Isobel, that's why you're exactly the right person to do this, because you get how your audience are feeling, so I would just say don't wait until you're ready. Just be prepared to fail and learn, but also just know that this is now a reality of new contemporary music careers. So embrace it.
You've essentially flipped imposter syndrome on its head and turned it into a business.
Yes, basically.
that was too long. Didn't read summary of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Isobel.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Did you notice which C word came up once again in that episode? Yes, it was the word community. I think that is going to be the recurring theme from every episode in this series. Community is where the future is, bringing people together, creating these spaces where we can collectivize and bring shared knowledge together. It's what we've always done throughout history, so it makes sense that humanity would decide that the future is going to be similar to our past, and perhaps our more distant past. And I think with the rise of AI, we are going to see a lot more human-focused, human-centered projects, and community is such a great way of doing that, bringing people together around a shared interest, a shared passion, a shared vision, a shared project. That to me feels like such a huge thing. I really love how Isobel talked about her business in that conversation, and I think if I was to be making a podcast that was like Diary of a CEO, all about how people run their businesses, these are the kind of businesses I would want to hear about and talk to. I think that there is something in the creation and construction of a project, being able to envisage it, but then to also be able to build it is such a big task. And I know that I've done it myself, and I know that it's not something that's small, it's not something which you just get on with and it happens. There are so many dead ends, so many boring bits of paperwork, so many things where you find yourself looking up the most banal information in order just to complete a really basic task, and none of that stuff really gets talked about. And I'm glad we didn't talk about it in this episode, because it would have been pretty dull. But I think that anyone that achieves anything, there is so much that you don't see. And I'm really grateful to Isobel for talking so candidly and openly with you and with me about her business, how it works. If you want to look her up, she is online on most platforms as Girls Twiddling Knobs. That's knobs with a kicking K or a K. So yeah, knobs with a K, if that didn't make sense. And you can find all sorts of things they're doing. Definitely subscribe to their podcast. They did an amazing episode recently, which I will let you immerse yourself in, because it would be a lovely surprise if you are going in completely blind without any introduction from me. And I just think that there's a lot everyone can learn from the ways in which Isobel's approached her business. I think that you can continue being a musician and making the music that you believe in, that's sovereign to you, without having to compromise it, if you can then build projects like this on the, not really on the side, I guess, to the fore, and then the music kind of becomes secondary for some people, and for other people it's the other way around. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of like where people's complementary skills go and what they can offer the world on top of their songs. So that was quite a different episode, I think. Maybe you disagree. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can email me on sean@drowningsound.org. You could also pop a review on Apple Podcasts if you want to. There's not a lot there, which, considering all the bad reviews I've given bands over the years, I thought I'd have had a few more nasty ones. And if you want to suggest ideas for future episodes, you can do that. If you want to ask some questions for some upcoming Q&As, I'm really thinking about how I can do stuff that's much more useful for artists as well as music fans. This podcast is predominantly for music fans to get their head around the chaos of all the people that make all the things that we love. And I think that looking for the moral compass in amongst it all, trying to find like the right path in the things that have got some things we can value and believe in, I think is really important. And I hope that in creating this podcast, that's what I'm creating for you. So I've been Sean, you've been you, this has been the Dragon Sound podcast. I will see you next time. Bye.